I wrote a blog last week on corporate slop, which seems to have caught quite a few people's attention. I was making the comparison between what's seen as AI slop, sort of hallucinations, overly worded AI responses, and the fact that some people were moaning about that and saying, look at all this garbage that AI is throwing out. And the comparison that I made is, actually, we already do a lot of garbage already in our organizations, and actually we could become more productive straight away if we actually tidied up some of that corporate slop. Like I said, it seemed to go down really well, so I thought I'd record a session on bureaucracy and give people some action, some things that they can do to actually address the root causes of bureaucracy. Now, I often think with bureaucracy, it reminds me a little bit of The Shining. If you've ever seen the movie The Shining, where it's just like this archaic mansion with endless corridors and you kind of get lost and slowly go mad. Here's policy, as opposed to here's Johnny. That's how it feels. That's how it feels. And as someone who worked in the public sector, you can be driven mad by bureaucracy and obstacles, but it's not unique just to the public sector. I was speaking to someone in the private sector last week, and they were talking about the hurdles that they have to overcome and the kind of amount of control that's tried to be retained centrally. And it's not like the evidence isn't there to actually, if you actually clean up bureaucracy, then it can make such a great difference. Gary Hamel and Michele Zanini for Harvard Business Review a few years back did this whole piece of work around bureaucracy. And what they found was that $9 trillion US dollars is wasted on excess bureaucracy. And that's the lived reality for most people listening to this right now. It's just like, yeah, that's me. And bureaucracy it ignites something inside of us, what we call a psychological reactance. Now, the signs of psychological reactance are hostility towards the thing. So when you find yourself getting irrationally angry about bureaucracy, that's a psychological reactance. That's one element. The other element is where people have this resistance to persuasion. So, and this happened quite a lot with bureaucracy, where you can say, oh, if we got rid of this, we could save this much time and this much money. And they're like, no, we couldn't. We've always done it this way and we always will. And you know who those people are. It's true, because they want to maintain that sense of control. So you have this kind of positive and negative psychological reactance. And it's all of these things that are contributing. There was a report in the FT last week or the week before last, where they interviewed Generation Z, and I think it was 52% of Generation Z didn't want to be managers. The middle management has got this image problem. Now, I've talked about middle managers before. I write about it a lot, and the fact that we just don't give them the support, we don't give them the training that they need in order to be effective. So no wonder they have an image problem, because when you look upwards, all you see are people who are technically very good but perhaps don't have the people skills, or else aren't very good at deconstructing all of the barriers that get in the way of real work. And they exist in every organization. Certainly in my experience, it's not limited just to the big organizations, it's small ones too, which I'll talk through in a second. So what we've got this scenario where bureaucracy is almost accepted in our place of work. And we really do need to address the root causes of it in order to remove it and free up time for productive work. So I prepared this model. And for highly bureaucratic organizations, you see all four of these things at once. When you've got all four of these things happening, then you've got a real problem. And this is usually where you spend, £5 million on management consultants to tidy up stuff that you really should be doing yourself. But that's where people come in, and we have efficiency programs and all of these kinds of things, because we're just so stuck. When you have one of them, that in and of itself is a problem, but all four is a real problem. So anyway, let me just quickly walk you through this model. We'll start in the bottom right-hand corner on legitimacy and conformity. So this is where organisations, what they will do is they'll have a look at what their competitors are doing. They'll have a look at what the market is doing. They'll have a look at the way that businesses should be run and should be set up. Sometimes it's senior managers who are joining the organisation. They'll say, this is what we did in company X. And essentially what they're saying is we need to do it in this way to make sure that we're doing business in the right way. So that's that legitimacy piece. Also, there's the conformity piece. Now, I want to make it really, really clear here. There's a distinction between what I would call kind of functional formality. There's just some stuff that needs to be done in a particular way. And you know, really that around conforming to legal requirements, etc. There are just some laws that have to be followed. You know, I remember working with one organisation, and the person I was talking to was like, this is the thing that's really holding us back. And it was adherence to a legal framework. And I'm like, you can't overly worry about that because you just have to do that. Every company in this country has to do this. And yes, it's a pain, but we just have to do it until the laws change. So that's what I would call kind of functional formality versus dysfunctional bureaucracy. And the dysfunctional bureaucracy is the stuff that's always made up. It becomes self-serving. And so, obviously, when we talk about legitimacy and conformity, sometimes, and it is just sometimes, people legitimize things. They'll say, oh, we have to do this. And I know myself as a manager, I spent many kind of days asking, why? Why do we need to do it? Why? Why the 5 whys? Why? It's probably a pain in the backside. But why? Trying to understand why we did it this way. And often it was down to history. All right, so that legitimacy and conformity where people say, we just have to do it this way in order to be this kind of business. So that's the first element. The second element is around information and power. Now, information and power, this is often where we have kind of the hierarchies. Only a level of this person can actually approve it. Now, a good example of this is when I went to work for one organisation, there were 22 signatories on one document. Every department head had to sign it off. Right? And it was all about hierarchy. It was all about information flow. It has to go through these people. And often you'll see this in people say, oh, I have to be copy me into that, copy me into that, copy me into that. I did a whole thing on emails and a rule that can save your outbooks, and lots of people like to read say they like to read every email, when really it's just an element of control. And, the way to spot a control freak is they say they're not control freaks. It's true. It's true. But there's just a kind of information flow hierarchy. And I think this is the one that lots of organisations get themselves lost in because I have to see it, I have to sign it. You'll have heard it a million times. It's got to go through them. If it doesn't go through them, then this is the consequence. And sometimes it's true. And so in that point, that's kind of that functional formality. If we want to do it in this way, these people have to see it. But it's trying to find, well, where's that line? Where's that line? Also, we have, a lot of people information hoard, and they'll keep information to themselves, and they'll say, this is mine, I need to see this, I need to own this, it has to come across my desk. And of course then, those people become bottlenecks, because all of a sudden things just get stuck. So that's the second thing, is information and power. The third thing is scale and complexity. Now, I mentioned at the start that it's not just limited to big organisations. I've worked with startups that have become bureaucratic because they didn't scale their culture. They lost that sense of who they are. And I see this often in startups. For me, there's kind of 2 points. There's when you get to 50 employees, because at that point, the founders don't know everybody like they used to. And then the next one is 150, which you may recognise as kind of Dunbar's number. But scale and complexity, all of a sudden, And it also links to legitimacy and conformity in the sense that we think that we have to behave and act in a certain way. And instead of scaling the culture in the right way to make sure we continually eliminate waste, what we end up doing as businesses is adding complexity. And we needn't do that. Our goal is to keep things as simple as we possibly can. And by kind of creating these formal structures. So a great example of this is I worked with a startup who had got themselves into exactly this position. And they'd established all kinds of boards. They'd brought someone in externally, or they may have established a new board because they were going for seed funding, who had then insisted that they create all of these boards, and which they'd never done before, and they found themselves writing terms of reference and all of these kinds of things. It was very old-fashioned and very archaic way of doing things. And it kind of didn't lend itself to the modern way. Now, again, there's the delineation between that kind of functional formality and dysfunctional bureaucracy, because some of those things had to be done, but they just didn't have to be done in the way that they did them. So there's that real thought needs to be given to how do we scale it to make sure that we remove as much complexity as possible. And then the fourth element is risk and control. And so that links to that legal liability that we have. And essentially what we end up with then is lots and lots of documents. And this happens a lot in the project management world, is that it's document after document after document after document. And the aim there is to de-risk the project, when actually all that does is really get in the way of getting stuff done. And again, there's some formal structures are required, of course they are, but often, and you'll find this with some middle managers, some senior leaders, is they'll say the way to de-risk this is to put these controls in, to put these documents in. We need to fill that, it needs to be signed. And so you can see when you have all four of these things happening at the same time, organizations can get really mired in paperwork and overly complex procedures. Now, Google were no different. So in 2009, Patrick Pichette, who was the CFO at the time, he recognized that the organization was becoming too bureaucratic, and staff had started to moan, and they'd started to provide constructive feedback as to the things that weren't working in the way that they should do. And of course, you get some people who try and cling on to the fact, we were a smaller company. That's all about scale, making sure that we scale the culture accordingly. But he basically said in 2009, you know what we're going to do, and we're going to do it once a year, is we're going to give you a day just to fix all of the bureaucratic things. We're going to give you the autonomy to fix them. One day a year, come together, work together, fix them. And he called it bureaucracy busting. And it's still going. So it's giving staff the opportunity to kind of fix those frustrations forever. But Amazon did something else similarly. They had a bureaucracy mailbox where employees can submit suggestions. And again, these things are fixed over time. And I'm pretty sure Yahoo did something similar under Marissa Mayer as well. But anyway, 3 stages then to bust bureaucracy. So that's how we get ourselves into this mess. So what can we do? Well, the first thing is look at the quick wins. And I know there's a bit of me that died inside when I said that myself. Look at the quick wins. Like, wins are never quick, right? And who's got the time to fix quick wins? I get it. But there'll be just some things that can be changed. You'll be able to look at them and go, that just doesn't work in light of this. Or else, we've had that for 10 years and this has all changed. We should change it. I remember, and my biggest bugbear, and I've mentioned this many times, my biggest bugbear was always procurement. Everything seemed to take 3 months, regardless of whether it could be done in 2 weeks. But rather than moan about it, we would present solutions. We'd say, here's some options about how we could fix this. And presented them at a level where they'd gain some traction, they'd gain some agreement so that we could move forward. So what are those quick wins? And you can have a look in your own team first. Remember, always address your own subculture first. I think the second thing then is, so first step is get rid of stuff. The second thing is, how can you streamline, what I call that functional formality, the stuff that needs to be done? How can you make it simpler? How can you make it easier? How can you make it better? Recognize that it's got to be done. I remember being governed when I was working in government by a body that oversaw our stuff, and we had to present so much stuff to them, and I was just, I just didn't understand why we had to provide it. So I went to them and I asked, why do we do it this way? Can we simplify it? And they said, oh, we only need 3 things. And they told me the 3 things that they need. And I came back and I said to my boss, I was like, oh yeah, I've just removed a load of work. And he said, but how did you manage that? I said, I just asked. And I know that sounds ridiculous. And, you know, it's very easy to immediately dismiss this and go, oh, I could never do that. But you can, and that's a good place to try. The other thing that you can do is bring together, you know, kind of a working group. It doesn't need to meet for 4 hours. You don't need a massive Teams channel. You can just simply come together as a group of people and say, you know, what's our biggest issue? How can we resolve it? And just put some time aside to actually work together and then see it through and then get it done. And then the third phase, which people often think should be the first thing, but in my experience, I would do those other 2 things first, then go and do the root cause mitigation. How did we get ourselves into this position? And, you know, often there's a couple of conversations required to sort of say, well, listen, you know, we want to simplify the things that we've done. And I worked for a telecommunications company back in 2015, I think it was, about 10 years ago. And we undertook a simplicity program. And so what we were looking to do is how can we take cost out of the business? And I think we ended up taking, or the company ended up taking like $200 million at the time out of the business, which is a huge sum of money. And it's because we went back and we said, okay, well, here's all of the, you know, point number 1, how can we, you know, kind of get rid of the old stuff? Point number 2, and the old stuff was things getting copied into an inbox that was monitored like 1 day a week or something like that. Point number 2, how can we streamline what we currently do? And then point number 3, let's go back and find out how we found ourselves in this position in the first place. And I would say it's very easy to point the fingers at individuals. I think that's the easy thing to do, to go, it's that person, they always ask for that. But what we found, and certainly what I find now in my work, is the root cause is often an outdated view of either the way companies should operate now, or else what we're doing is we're using technology in the wrong way. And so the root cause analysis does take a little bit longer, and it does require a little bit more in depth in a work stream. This is something you could give to consultants if you had the money and say, listen, here's the issue that we've got. You know, our productivity is taking a hit here, and we do all of this stuff and no one's got time for anything, and we've got 15 boards and we all seem to meet and we're going through 25 documents and they're all this thick. Can you help us get to the bottom of how we got ourselves into this mess? The thing I would say about bureaucracy, look at the old stuff, tidy up what you have, and then look at the root causes. And the thing with bureaucracy is you're never, ever, ever going to regret doing the work. You'll never regret doing the work. Every organisation, it doesn't matter what you do, where you are, you're going to come across things that just hold you back. And when you fix those things, when you bust your bureaucracy, you unlock time, which leads to productivity, and you get so much more done. Hope you've enjoyed today's session.